Hi guys, welcome to session 6. In this session, Ra talks about the working with the spiritual complex in becoming a healer. He also talks about where he comes from and who he is, basically. He talks about the Confederation of Planets, who they are and what they're made of. He touches on UFOs. And finally, he also talks about the harvest, what that means, and they do go deeper into the harvest in a later session, but for this one I'll just stick with what he shares in this session. So here we go. If you remember from session 5, he talked about how to become a healer and basically open a gateway to intelligent infinity, that the first thing you need to start working with is the mind. Once you have accepted the mind and seen the wholeness in your being in this regard, you then move on to the body. You accept the body and the wholeness of your being, and then you extend this out to others. See the wholeness of others. See that everything is as it should be, basically, in essence, as the law of one, and that nothing is essentially bad or good. This session is started with now moving on to step 3, or the third step, which is working with the spiritual complex. He describes that this is how the powers of energy healing are basically activated or accessed. He says that the spiritual complex embodies the fields of force and consciousness and is the least distorted. So I like that we can see that in the spiritual complex, consciousness is residing here. And I just wanted to highlight this for a moment because, there's so many teachings and so much information about what is going on. What is this universe? What is this reality? Who are we? What is happening beyond the physical? And I guess there are a number of moments in the Law of One where Ra clarifies quite a few of these questions for me. I've been through this book a few times, but going through it, I mentioned before, this time there's so much information that's being revealed that I feel like I've never listened to before. I've never read before, specifically from them. I've been introduced to many of these concepts, but the way that it is presented by them and the way that they explain it is just, I guess, with effort to create the least amount of distortion. So let's continue. So he talks about being able to balance the spirit complex, and he says that this is the longest and the most subtle part of learned teaching. He says that the mind controls the body, and that the mind, and that if the mind is single-pointed, balanced, and aware, the body is comfortable in whatever biases and distortions, right? Then the instrument is ready to proceed with the great work. I really want to place emphasis on the importance of beginning with the mind. And it's not easy to have the mind single-pointed, balanced, and aware. To me, how I'd kind of live this and how I understand it in my own life, whether this is exactly what he means, hopefully there's minimal distortion in my explanation or interpretation, is meditation helped me with single-pointedness. In other words, to be able to focus on one thing as long as you decide to focus on that thing, right? So you are not distracted by what is going on around you. I actually have had to start this recording a few times because there have been so many distractions around me and my mind has been pulled. I felt frustrated. And so I just took a moment to sit down and meditate and come back to that single-pointedness, completely draw my attention away from what is happening outside and into my into my inner being in order to share this knowledge with you from a place of the most clarity. And I knew that if I recorded it in that feeling of frustration, that energy would ultimately be translated or expressed even unconsciously to the receiver through my recording. So I guess this was an excellent opportunity to practice before sharing the work. The awareness for me is knowing what's going on inside your head and inside your body at any given point. In other words, your thoughts are not leading you because you are awake and aware that firstly, they are happening. Secondly, they're not who you are, and you get to choose what action or reaction you're going to take. So, in fact, let's just move the reaction. What action consciously you're going to take. So he says once these distortions have been removed, then the instrument is ready to proceed with the great work. The great work he describes as the work of wind and fire. I honestly don't know what he means by that. And I can try to guess or try to interpret it, but I think I'm not going to do that in this case. When I do think of creation, I do think of wind moving things and fire being this outward pushing force. Other than that, I'm not going to try to explain or to interpret what he means by this. Hopefully there is an explanation later down the line. I don't remember if there will be. If you have something that you understand around this, then please go ahead and pop it in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts or your knowledge or whatever sources of information you can share. He goes on to say that the spiritual body is basically the energy field, or as an energy field, is a pathway. So it's a pathway between the physical body and intelligent infinity. He says that when the body and the mind are open, spirit becomes a working shuttle between the individual and the creator. I really love this analogy, the way that he's described this image that's created as spirit is not just up in the higher realms, doing its higher realm thing. Spirit is the shuttle. The purpose is to connect the physical with the creator. And that when we can let go of the body and the mind enough, then spirit is able to do its little job of moving information back and forth between the two. He says that your will is going up, basically, to the creator. So your will as an individual, entity or expression. And the creative fire and wind is coming down into you. So that is basically what's happening as spirit is moving. Your will up and the creative wind and fire down. He goes on to explain that healing is basically an opening of this pathway to intelligent infinity. That many have opened this like a random gateway or a hole, he calls it, in your field through things like LSD, or I guess plant medicines can be included in here, or any substance really that alters your state of consciousness and opens that gateway, but that it's being done without control by tapping into other energy sources. He says that you may or may not connect with entities who want to serve, and that the best thing to do is to carefully and consciously open this channel in order to serve in a more dependable way. And so you basically have control over what's coming in because you are consciously aware. I'll give you an example. In my channeling experience or experiences, I have connected with higher dimensional or higher beings of higher consciousness. And I've also connected with entities of lower consciousness or not so well-meaning. But because I am conscious and in control of whether I decide to continue to connect with that entity or to end the connection or to listen and translate that information or not to, I essentially, it becomes reliable. How do I know that it is well-meaning or not well-meaning? Is through the sensitivity to that vibration and the ability to switch off the connection when I choose. Whereas when you are under the influence, you do not have that ability to switch off your connection. Now, I definitely do not speak down on any kind of plant medicines or substances to help connect you with other dimensions and other beings. I've used them as well. I've used ayahuasca. I've used mushrooms. In fact, all of my consciousness expansion work was done before I started exploring that stuff. And then I explored that stuff because I had contracted and I had the desire to expand again, and I didn't quite know how to walk the path that I had already walked. And so plant medicines became really useful. I also know of people who've used plant medicines to open themselves up and expand their consciousness and then move on to a conscious path where they're not using plant medicines as their main source of connection. They've connected through plant medicines or through other substances and then are able to do so consciously thereafter. So I think what's important is whether we use plant medicines or not, to still train the mind and the body and the spirit to access intelligent infinity at will, at your desire, and to do so in a conscious way that you as an individual expression has the choice of stopping. So moving on from there, he says that to some people this may appear to be a miracle, but to the one who has carefully opened the door, this is commonplace. And I can speak to this as well, and I've had many conversations about this, that, when I do or talk about energy healing and all of this interesting stuff, this metaphysical, otherworldly, outside of this physical reality stuff, to me it's so normal because my life is this. If I decide to start channeling energy when I'm walking in the street, I can do that. I wouldn't recommend it, by the way. If I decide to, at any point, if I decide to kind of open that portal and connect with intelligent infinity for the purpose of channeling healing energy or channeling, it doesn't take much effort. But to somebody who has not started on the path, it's like, that is so magical. How are they doing that? That takes a special person. I remember looking at spirituality and astral projection and all of this interesting stuff as, wow, that's so far beyond any normal person's capacity or capability. But when you start doing it, it just becomes who you are and a part of your life. It just becomes normal. And I think that's to be said for any ability that is beyond the physical. You practice it, you master it, and then all of a sudden it just is, like walking or riding a bike. So I will continue. Ra says that this is enough regarding the healing stuff for now, that he feels he's given basically enough information for them to work with, and that as they kind of master that, he will go deeper at a later stage. I just want to give a little warning here for a second. This session is quite a bit longer than others, so it may take me a little while, longer than my previous sessions of sharing, to get through it. But it is really fascinating, and so I'll continue. So the questioner asks, where is Ra from and what is their history? He says he's from Venus, and they were basically in the sixth dimension when they were there. Or their physical appearance is golden, tall, and delicate. And that when they came to the earth, they came in that physical form, but because they didn't fit in, they eventually left. I think you can imagine that if tall, delicate, golden beings of light, or physical appearing light, were to walk among us, I think many people would see them as gods and start to praise and worship them. That's exactly what Ra did not want to happen. So they wanted people to be empowered by the information that was brought, but they noticed that people started to look to them as gods and give their power away. And so they left. But before they left, they built the pyramids. The questioner also asked how they came to Earth, and they said that they came from Venus using thought. The questioner went on to ask if they could take a human back to Venus at that time, would the human survive? Ra says that the conditions were not habitable to humans, and that the fifth and the sixth dimensions are or were conducive to growing, learning, and teaching on Venus at that time, but basically lower dimensions were not. The questioner asks, how did you transition from Venus in the sixth dimension to Earth? Because he imagined that they would probably be invisible to us. So Ra says, dissolution into nothingness is the same as dissolution into unity. So essentially, there is not nothingness. So from the sixth dimension, they could manipulate, using thought, the infinite intelligence that was present in each particle of light, and so they could make themselves visible to us. The council also gave them permission to do so, and this is the council that protects Earth. The questioner asks, where is this council? And Ra says in the octave, eighth dimension of Saturn's rings. He does go deeper into explaining the difference between density and dimension. I also, have learned about density and dimension from different teachers. And so my understanding of the difference between them may not be exactly as Ra describes it in these books. So I'm not going to attempt again to describe the difference, but I just want to leave this thought with you that there is a difference and that it will be described. Also, the questioner does at a later point in this very session use density and dimension interchangeably. He uses them together, and Ra does not correct him. So I'm just putting it out there so that you're aware of these two words that are thrown around, especially in conscious community or in spiritual communities or in metaphysical communities where people are trying to understand this knowledge. So moving on, the questioner asks, are there people like us, like humans, on other planets in the solar system? And then Ra asks, do you request the time-space present information or time-space continuum or space-time continuum information? Questioner says both. Ra says in the past, so long ago, people lived on Maldek. When I say people, I don't mean humans like us. I mean like other third density beings that were in the physical form, in the third dimension, that existed the way that we exist. He says that they destroyed their planet and then they came to Earth, and that Earth is currently the only hospitable planet which offers or is able to offer lessons to decrease the mind-body-spirit complex distortions regarding the law of one. In other words, Earth is the only place in the solar system where you and I can come and learn how to expand our consciousness and realize who we really are. One, with everything. There is no other planet in the solar system that can support this kind of learning at the level that we are at in this physical incarnation. The questioner asks how they came here, and Ra says through harvest, which they will go more deeply into in a later session, and that they were incarnated through higher spheres within this density. I'm again not 100% certain of whether this means they had to leave their physical vessels on the other planet. In other words, they all died, and then the consciousness or the soul was then incarnated into a physical vessel on this planet, or if there was some kind of moving of their physical vessel to this planet. I don't think it's the second one. I do believe it's the first one, but I think they will get deeper into that. So, especially because he used the word harvest and incarnated. This tells me that they had to leave the physical and come into a new physical form. In other words, die and be reborn in a new body. So the questioner asks how long ago, and Ra says it's 500,000 years ago. And then the questioner asks, are all of Earth's population from Maldek originally? Maldek, again, is the planet that they lived on that was destroyed. Ra says no, that our population contains many various groups that have been harvested from other second dimension and third dimension spheres or earths or planets, and that they're not all, or we're not all, one race or background of beginning. There are other books that go into this, like The Prism of Lyra, I believe is one. I haven't read the whole book, but I've read some of it. I do know that it is said to be a book detailing humanity's history, where we come from and what races we're made up of, what star races or ET races we're made up of. The questioner asks about the harvest and the transfer of beings to Earth and how that works. Ra says, those who finish a cycle of experience will be sent to a place or density or dimension that reflects their vibratory distortion of their mind-body-spirit complex. In other words, they're human, the human. So whatever level they ended at in the cycle, at this place, they will be moved to a place that reflects the level that they're at currently. In other words, you cannot just jump to a higher plane if you have not been prepared. He does explain what this process looks like. I find this part extremely fascinating. He says that they are separated by choice. So when this is happening, when they're moved to a place that reflects their vibratory distortion, their vibratory level, that they basically, you can imagine maybe in your family that your consciousness is higher than the rest of your family members. And now when it comes time to be harvested or to move from this place into a new experience or a new place, a new planet, a new dimension or density, that not all your family members are going to go to the same place at the same time with you. Some will go to a planet that will continue the learning that they were doing on this planet at this time, and some will go to a different planet, or you might go to a different planet of a higher or lower density or dimension. He says that there are nurturing law of one beings that basically guard this process, so it's not random. You don't have to be afraid. He then goes on to say, this is the fascinating part, a spirit complex moves along a line of light until the light grows too glaring. Then he stops. So their learning will be here to decrease or discover their distortions. So in other words, this is just, I think, the most fascinating line of the whole book, of the whole 6 sessions that we've explored thus far. And the reason is that you are essentially completely responsible and capable of allowing yourself or seeking the opportunity to be able to withstand more light. So you can imagine that maybe a torch is shining into your eyes and it's really dim. And then the light gets brighter and brighter and brighter until it hurts your eyes. It is far too uncomfortable. So imagine it this way. The soul is moving along this line of light. And when the light gets too much to bear, this is where it stops and this is where its learning continues. So you in this physical incarnation, in other words, gets to decide how much light you are going to train your mind-body-spirit complex to be able to handle, so that when the time of harvest comes, you do not incarnate into the same density, you incarnate into a different dimension and density. And and basically the point of incarnating into that dimension or density is to decrease and discover the distortions within your being that give you the illusion that you are separate, that things are not one. So it's just more opportunity to learn, to come into oneness. I mean, I really love how this book just makes it all so possible. You know, I think through our gurus and, enlightened people and ascended masters, and not even the ascended masters. Let's talk solely about the physical beings who call themselves enlightened, right? Or who others call enlightened. It seems to normal man like you need to bow down to this being because he is above you, because he has achieved something that you do not have the capacity in this lifetime to achieve. This very notion is a distortion in your mental body that needs to be collapsed in order to realize that you are already enlightened. You are already one. And that's all it is. The collapsing of the belief, the collapsing of the distortion that you cannot attain oneness and truth and clarity in this lifetime. I'm going to continue. This is a long one, as I mentioned. So the questioner goes on to ask, how long in years is a cycle? Ra says it's around 25,000 years, which they consider a major cycle. And those who have progressed may be harvested, right? In other words, taken and moved to the next level of learning. He also says that it's around 75 to 76,000 years for the entire cycle, where all will be harvested regardless of your progress. He says that the planet has then moved through its useful part in that dimension. And so in essence becomes useless to people or beings who still need to do certain learning in the lower levels, of that vibration or of that density. And so the planet will basically ascend to a higher dimension, and those beings who still have this lower consciousness that they need to overcome or to learn from or experience or to transcend, they will not have the lessons necessary on the planet because now it is of a higher density, right? So they need to be harvested and moved to somewhere that is a vibrational match. The questioner goes on to ask what Earth's position currently is with respect to this progression of the cycle. Ra says that it's in the fourth dimension vibration, but that it has struggled to make the transition, and that this began a few or several years ago. Remember, the book was created in the 80s, so several years before the point of the creation of this book, or this channeling. In fact, the 80s. And that it would take around 30 years for it to be complete. I think it's safe to say 30 years have passed and we are now in the fourth dimension. The questioner asks, what percentage will inhabit the fourth density? I think this is where he uses the question density and dimension interchangeably of this planet. And Ra says that the harvesting has not yet happened, and thus the estimation is meaningless. So he doesn't give a percentage. The questioner asks, have you connected with us because we are in this transition? Ra says essentially yes, that they have seen our suffering and they have looked for an instrument with minimal distortions to accept the information and to share it. If you remember, I think in the first session, Ra talks about how when they did bring this information to Egypt, the information was used in less compassionate ways and so was distorted for the use of those in power and was not used as they had intended. So that is why they have stayed away for so long, because of the distortions. But now, because of the transition, they're bringing the message back, and they had to, of course, hope to find or wait to find or try to find somebody that could communicate this information without distorting it, which was Carla and her team. The questioner asks, have you connected, skipping that part, we've just done that. The questioner says that some of the disc-shaped UFOs that they have seen, he asks, do they come from Venus, essentially, and are they Ra's crafts? Ra says no, that they have used crystals and bell-shaped crafts in our past that have been visible to us. This was about 18,000 years ago, and he mentions 11,000 years, but I didn't quite understand exactly what he was trying to say about 11,000 years. You're welcome to have a look at the books and see if you can understand that. And that the photos of the bell-shaped craft from about 30 years ago that were taken were not them. That those were thought forms that were created by our society memory complex. In other words, the mass consciousness, he says, from back in the day when the bell craft first showed itself, that image remained in the minds of the people who witnessed it and basically created a thought form. If you remember from a previous session, thought form is basically something that is created from your mind, from your thinking, that then has a consciousness of its own. He says that at present, the Venus population is no longer in the 6th density. The questioner then goes on to ask, are any of the current UFOs reported from other planets? And Ra doesn't answer the question directly, but he does give some information about the Confederation of Planets. He says that he is a member, or they are a member, of the Confederation of Planets serving the one infinite creator, and that it is made up of approximately 53 civilizations comprising of approximately 500 planetary consciousness complexes in this confederation. That Earth beings are also a part of this confederation. However, they are those who have moved beyond the 3rd dimension. And that it also contains planetary entities from our solar system and from other galaxies. So it's quite a wide group of people or beings or entities that serve this planet and others, of course, as well. And then lastly, the question asks, do any come here in... I don't know what I was trying to say here, but I think he was asking, have they come here in spacecraft? They as in Ra, or the Confederation rather. Have any of them come in spacecraft in the past 30 years? And then Ra has a resistance to sharing this because he thinks that it's not important to the law of one, and that the law of one is really what he's here to do. But he respects the questioner's reasons for wanting to share this information and for wanting to understand it as well. So he says that each entity that wishes to break quarantine and appear in your 3rd density requests permission. This, the reason and the purpose is given, and it will either be accepted or rejected. So quarantine, we'll come to this as well later. So basically Earth is quarantined, but we'll come to this in a later session. What quarantined means is that other entities and beings cannot just come and land on the planet and do whatever they like. We're protected. That information will be revealed later. He also says that there have been as many as 15 Confederation entities at any one time in our skies, and that others have been available to us through thought. And at the present moment, which was back then, there are 7 operating, or were 7 operating in our density. And that the purpose is to allow those people, or the purpose of showing themselves is to allow those people to become aware of infinity, which often is best expressed through to the uninformed as a mystery or the unknown. This brings me to my awakening experiences. And, having those mystical experiences it didn't immediately take me onto the path of wanting to understand, because I knew at the time, which was something that helped me get to the experiences in the first place, was that every person has their own distortion, their own distorted lens of perception. And so anything I listen to or read is going to be through their lens of perception, and in essence will not be truth. So I didn't want to learn from anybody else, because I wanted to remain in the purity of the experience and not begin to contract or squish it into a box of language and interpretation, which would essentially kind of remove the essence of the experience. Eventually, I did have the desire to begin to know and to understand, and that desire led me to the law of one, and to other information that I now teach and share and live as best I can. And it, makes me think of other people and how they have come to expanding the consciousness of themselves as well as of the planet. People who have seen spacecraft, and then all of a sudden the questioning begins, oh my gosh, is this real? This is not just my imagination. And so now they begin to seek this knowledge. It incites a deep sense of curiosity that sends you on a search to discover who you really are. And through that discovery, you expand your consciousness and realize your true nature. And so all of these mystical experiences, though yoga and Buddhism can sometimes kind of bring you away from getting distracted by them. So in other words, they say, don't become impressed by this magical experience. Don't stop there. Keep going until you discover who you really are, even beyond that in-between state, that mystical experience. Keep going until you are liberated. So I'm going to leave it there. I hope you found this session is as interesting as I have. And I hope you're enjoying the series. It's really been a pleasure to climb back into this work in this way and to share it with you all. I wish you a really beautiful day, and I will see you guys soon.